My name is Michael Green, and I will be moderating this panel, which I frankly think is one of the most important panels at Wine Paris. Here's what I think you are going to learn. You're going to learn once again that research drives data. And data gives you insight through creativity to make better choices. Choices to do what? To sell more wine. Specifically, to sell more wine in America. My background, I have been a retailer, an importer, a journalist, and today I am a marketer. I want to tell you the format of what you can expect this morning. We're here for 90 minutes, and no one can leave early, because a lot of the really spirited information will come later on in the conversation when we all can dialogue together. I am joined on the stage by a host of not only wine luminaries, but also colleagues who are going to provide tremendous insight today. So here's the format. We are going to have two 20-minute presentations, and then we are going to open it up for a panel discussion, and I will introduce the rest of the panel after the remarks have been made. After this seminar, please do stay around and meet the panelists. They have so much good information to share. I also want to thank you all in advance for being here, because the most precious thing on the planet is our time. And I thank you for spending your time with us. I am pleased to present our first speaker, Thorsten Hartmann from EWSR, who surveys the landscape and forecasts alcoholic beverage consumption in the U.S. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for coming. You might have seen me yesterday already. I gave two speeches over at the Vinexpo halls on global trends in other beverage alcohol.
Thorsten, sorry to interrupt. Can you pull a little closer to the microphone?
I need to bend over, don't I? Yes. No, that's fine. Don't worry. Yes. So today is all about wine, and specifically all about French wine in the U.S. Of course, the U.S. wine market is one of those controversial things. We've just been very controversial a month ago with our press release calling for the first decline ever in the last 25 years in the U.S. wine market. So I know we're being controversial, and that's why we're here, to defend ourselves and to gather our views, to discuss what can be done about it. So, quick introduction. The IWSR is all we do, we live and breathe, is beverage alcohol. That's all we do. We measure it, we segment it, we comment on it, we forecast it, and most importantly, we provide insight on why we believe things have been happening and how we think things will be behaving in the future, given consumer trends, industry trends, trade trends, whatever there is. So let's start with some really good news here. You are all in the French exporting business to the US, I presume. So French wine has been doing really well over the last year, actually. So 2018, which is the last reporting year that we've got our database. French wine has actually overtaken Australian wine as the second most important imported wine, in addition, of course, to US domestic wine. So this is no mean feat. If you can see these trajectories there. Italian wine still by far dominating US imports, but France is really coming up there now, and of course everything now depends on what will be happening with the tariffs going forward.
And we will talk about the tariffs later on, because I know many of you here continue to be concerned with the tariffs.
So if you look at just some highlight figures here, 15.5 million cases of French wine, and this is all types of wine exported over to the States in 2018. This is up by a very significant 7%. This is very, very good percentage growth. So 18 was a fantastic year for your industry for dealing with US importers, which of course is also no mean feat. You know, exporting to the US is one of those myths. You can't actually export to the US, as you know. You export to 50 different states with 50 different rules and 50 different ways of merchandising and being able to market, and you have to choose your distributors very carefully. Some can operate cross-border, some cannot. And even from other parts of the beverage alcohol spectrum, spirits, for example, some of the more enterprising spirits exporters to the States specifically choose domestic wine companies in the US as their spirits distributor just because they have this way of accessing cross-border throughout the different states. It's a very difficult way of doing business, but as you can see, 7% up, it can be quite rewarding. The breakdown is about 80-20. There's a little bit of light aperitif involved as well, of course, vermouth, Lillet, that sort of product. But about 80% of the exports of French wine into the US are still at the moment with 18% sparkling. What is complete key, and was what really worked last year and what 2018 was rosé. Especially the lighter Provence rosés. They have been really trending in the States. There has been a lot of buzz there. It's something that is hard to replicate in terms of the flavor profile. And French producers have been very successful in pushing this into the market. You've heard big acquisitions going on in this space. LVMH buying Whispering Angel, for example. You know, that's the sort of that's the way of companies changing their ways of addressing the US market. They saw a trend, they really clung onto that trend, and they really made it work for themselves. And as you can see here, Germany, China, UK, they're all important export markets for French wines, but they're all down. The only one that's really up, and up significantly, was the States, hence the title of the presentation. Now, how does this break down? We as DWSR, we have very tight pricing segmentation. So we use price bands as our definition for 7 different price bands, starting from low cost to value, standard, premium, super premium, ultra premium, prestige, prestige and above. So more than half of all wines exported are actually in the standard and below. This is not something that you would instinctively think about French wines in the US. You would think these are the very high, high value products that are being sold in the US. Not so. Well, they are, but outsold by the standard and below. That changes, of course, when you look at the sparkling, and that is, of course, where we are. A lot of the sparkling that's coming out of France is champagne, which of course is by nature probably premium and above. Now this is...
I don't like this slide at all. I don't like this slide at all.
We have been brave in doing this, and we were very controversial. We actually made the news. We were on CNN, we were on ABC, I think. We had, we were called for a lot of interviews because it was controversial. And there is some resistance. Other commentators say, no, it's not true. Now, what we say is consumption has declined for the first time. What is not down yet is shipments. But all the indications from us, from our contacts that we have in the US wine business, but also from our rival market commentators, so Retail Audit, for example, Nielsen, they say October was a dreadful month for wine. October should be a really good month for wine in the trade because it's preceding the 2 big holidays coming up. Wine Intelligence, whom I've had a discussion with yesterday at Vinexpo, they say from the consumer side that people are starting to move away from wine to either to other beverage alcohol or indeed to moderating their drinking. So yes, we hate this too, you know, for us. A better functioning market is of course better because we can sell to more people in terms of the advice they need and in terms of the data that they need. Look, whatever this is, you know, we might revise it when our new data comes out in May 2020. But whatever it is, it was not a fantastic year for wine in the US. That is for sure. Whether it's declined, whether it's been stable, but for sure it was not.
And this goes beyond French wine. We are talking about
wine.
wine consumption in general.
Wine.
Okay.
Yeah. But there are other things we need to watch, and that is also something that you need to watch in terms of who you use for selling your wines into the US. So two particular sectors I want to talk about here. One is on-premise. Wine is just not penetrating the on-premise enough in the States. There needs to be more done for wine to work well in the on-premise. So this is bars, this is restaurants, this is pubs, sports bars, hotel bars, whatever it is. Wine is just not penetrating because beer is so overwhelming there. And this is partly just because who those people are and how much pressure they can exert on on-premise outlets. What's working a lot better, and this is also where your opportunities could lie, is the e-commerce. Now, e-commerce, we've commented on e-commerce in the world for the last 2 years now, and we see it as the way forward, especially for wine. Some countries are better than others in e-commerce, and the US, surprisingly, well, you'd think instinctively with Google and Amazon and everybody else, Silicon Valley being there, it should be at the forefront of e-commerce, not so in beverage alcohol. And that is partly because of the peculiar nature of laws in the States on how beverage alcohol can be sold, and especially how it can be sold cross-border. So the whole issue of who is being taxed where when you have a cross-border e-commerce transaction, that is part of the problem. Nevertheless, there is a lot of wine actually already in e-commerce. What is missing because of the laws that exist at the moment is something that works just like in Amazon, that helps you do a cross-country distribution. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. So while the market is down, we still saw really good 2019 movement of French wine into the US. However, then this came. And there you can see how price sensitive the market actually is, and that comes also down to the previous slide that I've shown you, that a lot of French wine in the US is indeed standard and below. The more you move down into those price segments, the more price sensitive you get. And then if you have a hit like the tariff imposition, the trade reacts almost immediately. So you can see here on the slide from October to November, once the 25% tariff hit, there was a real drop in shipments over to the States.
And we're going to hear in a few minutes how this has affected an importer as well as an agent later on in the discussion.
So, as you can see from that chart is quite a scary one. A 25% imposition, it goes down by quite a chunk. And so it all depends on whether we have this or whether we have this. And I'm really not exaggerating. This is, the threat of the 100% tariff because of this whole Boeing Airbus fiasco is nasty, and this is something that can change the future of a lot of people, including, all the way down to the farming industry. Of course, US wineries would be helped to a certain extent by this, but there will always be an element of, you can't replace French wines with something else because you've got something very special to offer to the world. Every wine producer has its own, points to make, its own offers to make. So, you're not replaceable as such in the eyes of the consumer. So there will always be consumers who will pay the price, and they might just pay the 100% surcharge because they want to have a French wine. But because of this whole issue of standard and below being so important to French exports, if 100% tariff hits, you will be impacted. That is absolutely for sure. What will also work in your favor is organic. So organic wines is a feature that works well in the US. There's good certification about. People do recognize what organic means, what benefits it gives to the products that they eat and drink. There are distribution platforms around that really highlight that across food and beverage, including wines. So, concepts like Whole Foods, for example. There's a lot of e-commerce about on the organic side, and of course France is quite strong in terms of offering organic wines. So the certification, once you're certified with the US authorities, once that's all sorted out between the EU and the US certification, you should have really good opportunities to sell into the US. One thing I really want to instill in you, there is an element of fright and being scared of being overloaded with information about wine that consumers in the US seem, at least part of the consumer in the US, seem to move away from. There's this whole issue of casual wines, and you can say I'm exaggerating here. So, and I'm not denigrating any of these brands here, but I want to give you a picture of what really works at the moment in the US market. And again, we're talking mostly on the standard and below side, more so than the Grand Cru world. US consumers are starting to really want to have something that is easily explained. It doesn't need to be cheap, but it needs to be quite overt. They don't want to make a difficult choice. They don't want to need to know about vintages and about varietals and about climate and about left bank or right bank. Some brands are tongue-in-cheek. So there's White Girl, there's all sorts of things. There's canned wines, there's Yellowtail, of course, Barefoot. They're all famous wines that are making a point in being easy, in being accessible. And sometimes French wines can be not easy and not very accessible because you scare them away. So they will have their place. I'm not saying you need to change all that. But what I'm saying is you need to be aware that there's an element of consumer in the States that needs it a little bit easier. So you may want to look into what you can do in terms of your branding, in terms of your, the different brands that you might be able to offer that might just be for the US, not sold elsewhere perhaps, and have real discussions with your distributors, with your various distributors, because that also might differ from state to state to state. So some states might be more overtly pro-French than others.
So if we were to take away 3 points from your presentation, what would they be?
I think this is probably an important point here, saying understand your US consumer better. And if you're a US consumer, and by nature really, the distributors you're working with who are addressing those US consumers, listen to them what they need. And if it's something they need out of you that requires some sort of change, it might be a new brand, it might be a new packaging format, anything like that, listen very closely. That would be my advice, because sometimes it might just be, what we understand to work here in our domestic market might not work well in the export market, but there might be something that works really well. So there's a reason why Whispering Angel as a brand works well in the States.
Thorsten, if we want to get in touch with you, how would we do that?
You do this by doing this.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I want to make a few comments. As I shared with you, I started my career as a retail wine merchant, actually at the oldest wine shop in America, that just celebrated 200 years. And I truly believe economically that more choice is a feature that's not a benefit. People often get overwhelmed, and the barrier to entry of many styles of wine can be very intimidating, and people shut down. You ask the average consumer what grape is used to make white Burgundy, they don't know. You share with people that the grape that's used to make white Sancerre is Sauvignon Blanc, they are shocked. And I think for many of us here, we are so entrenched in what we assume people will know, and frankly, they often don't care. They often don't care. And I want to make one other point before I bring up our next speaker. I think that the idea of focusing on-premise, which I know you're going to address, is so critical. You know, we're seeing trends of you walk into a hotel now at certain hotels and there are hotel happy hours. And you can partner with associations like Côte de Bordeaux or Van d'Alsace or something like that to be part of a promotional program to get people to taste your wine. Our next speaker is now going to drill this down really to consumers. I spoke with her on the phone not too long ago, and she is a powerhouse. I'd like to introduce Kathy Huey. Did I get it right? No. She is the founder of Enolatics, and she's a contributor for Forbes magazine. Let's give her a round of applause.
Okay, we're good. Good morning. Bonjour. My name is Kathy Hoeha, and my company is called Enolatics. As Michael said, I write about the business and the politics of the wine industry for Forbes. And I also co-founded this company about big data for the wine industry a couple years ago. And what we want to do today is provide a complementary look at this question of the future of French wines in the US market. My colleague spoke about the trade data that you just heard. I'm really going to be focusing on the consumer side of things, so the consumer data. What we look at is big data. So let me start. Let me tell you a story first. Is anyone a football fan? Club Brugge. Does anybody know Club Brugge? Come on, yeah. Mon mari, il vient de Belgique, et nous visitons Belgique et aussi France chaque année. And we were in Bruges, in Brugge, over the Christmas break. And there was a game on. There was a game, Club Brugge was playing that night. It was, the end of December. And Bruges is a beautiful city. They love football. I don't necessarily. So for me, it was a couple hours on my own. So when I have a couple hours on my own, what do? But I go and I do two things. I go to a bookstore and then I go to a wine bar. So this was the reality of Bruges that day. It was cold and it was wet and it was kind of yucky and the end of December. I went to a wine bar and this is what I found. I found this wine, this Gamay. It was called Hey Gamine. From the Loire region of France. And this wine was not only my favorite Gamay of the past few years, but probably my favorite wine that I've had in the past, I would say, 2.5 to 3 years. So what was it? What was it about this wine on this cold day at the end of December in wintry, rainy Bruges when I was by myself in a wine bar? So I wanted to look at 3 reasons why this particular French wine worked for me as a US consumer. Reason number 1 is curiosity. I was curious about this wine. I didn't know this wine before I had it, but I knew about this wine. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The second reason this worked for me as a US consumer is its digital fluency. There was a reason that on my phone, I pulled up the wine bar where I went, and at that wine bar, I could pull up their menu and the wines that they had on offer. I like this wine so much that I went back the next day to buy some more of it to take back to the US, and I bought the entire inventory, and guess how many bottles that was? 2. And I bought both. I bought out the whole place. I bought 2 bottles of this wine to take home. And the third reason why this works so well for me as a US consumer is time spent in the market. To credit maybe not this producer specifically, but producers like them working in the US market. So is this a label that looks like this? Is this the future of French wines in the US? Is this the future of French wines in the US? This is my question. My answer is yes and no. My answer is maybe. And there's some caveats to this. So let's talk about it. What is, in this session today, what's the real elephant in the room? What's the real elephant in the room? Maybe Michael and maybe the organizers of this conference want you to think it's tariffs, and tariffs are a big deal, no doubt about it. Personally, I think that the elephant in the room that we're not really talking about so much is this. Maybe, and stay with me here, but just maybe, the US is not the best market for French wine. Maybe the US is not where you should be putting your energy. So I'm going to talk about this and show you some data. So what does the data already tell us? We can study this, we can look at this, we can know it with some degree of significance and certainty. What does it already tell us about French wine in the US market? We're going to look at that. But first, let me take a step back. As I said, I work with big data. That means millions and millions of data points. We focus on consumer behavior and consumer preferences all around the world specific to wine. So when I say big data, often I get, what does that mean? So I show this example, show this image, because basically this is one of our data partners from whom our consumer data comes from all over the world. It's an app, it's a platform on your phone. And I asked them to show me what does the data look like to them. So these are engagements over only 1 month's time on only their platform all around the world. So consumers are telling us every moment of every day what they think about wine. Every moment of every day, what they think about it. It's out there. I generate this kind of data all the time. So what we do is we track this and we follow the digital trail. Here's one more example from a partner, and this is an alcohol delivery source called Minibar, where someone through their app orders wine, beer, or spirits in most markets in the U.S., and that app is delivered to them through the network of retailers within usually 30 minutes. So what kind of data does this generate? An address of consumers, what they've bought, how many bottles they've bought, and what they spent, and the mix of products in the order. So if they ordered a wine from the Rhone, did they also order, tequila? Did they also order something else? So this is the kind of data that's out there and available, and with our partners that we study all the time. So let me bring it home to this conversation today. This chart both makes and doesn't make my point. What I want to show you here is along the left line are the producers of wine from all around the world, and along the top of the screen is the consumer interest that we can track through our partners in these countries all around the world. What this shows you, sort of the takeaway, is we're loyal. French people are loyal to French wines. US people are loyal to US wines. Italian people are loyal to Italian wines. However, the darkest line there is France. So when you look at consumer interest in French wines all around the world, it's very promising. It's very promising. But look, however, at one of the lightest dots on that chart is the
US.
United States, far on the right. So
Very interesting.
that is, you could read that as a warning sign. Consumer interest in French wines, if you compare it around the world, in the US is not as heavy, is not as intense as it is in other areas. Consumers are loyal to their domestic brands, and let's look at the US specifically. So here from another data source, we're looking at consumer interest in, say, the top 15 markets all around the country. The green is US. US consumers are interested mostly in US wines. To the left is Italian, is the red, and to the left of that is France. The pink is France. So let's say that US in general, say, account for 60 to 65%. Everybody else, including France, is fighting over what's left. Here's what's left. And this is sort of and we studied this at a certain price point. And I just want to make the caveat that you can certainly slice this different ways. This was sort of pulled from a study that we did of premium wines. And at the price point that we were looking at here, Italy holds a market share of around 14% of consumer interest. And that is represented by about 2,100 wines. France, on the other hand, holds a market share of 19% more, but it's represented by more than twice as many wines. So in other words, in the eyes of consumers, Italian wines at this price point do more with less. So again, something as a French producer, you might want to consider in the US market. So let me look at one more data source. A partner of ours called Queenie, it's based in Vancouver in Canada, and they study consumer expectations relative to performance for French, Italian, US, and Australian wines. And they pulled some data for us for this presentation for me. When they measure consumer expectations, they do this by asking what the consumer, digitally, asking what the consumer thinks about the bottle, thinks about the price and the label before they even taste the wine. Okay, so this is just what they're expecting. The initial finding is that consumer expectations of Italian and French wines are higher than the US and Australian wines, for sure. So France, as you should, is trading on your tradition. You have a reputation, and it's a good one. Here's sort of how that looks graphically. You can look at the red and the white comparison. However, there's a but. Consumers are least likely to recommend French red wines once they've tried them. They're most likely to recommend Italian red wines once they've tried them.
Why do you think that is?
I think there's a couple of reasons for it. And this is only, as I said, one data source. So definitely a more comprehensive study needs to be done. I think, and let me just sort of forward ahead to the graphic of this, I think part of the reason, Michael, has to do with who's in the room, with who the consumers are. If we were to go in and segment further, say, by newcomers to wine versus enthusiasts about wine, or maybe even specialists about wine, and maybe even in different markets, we might find different things. And we can do that, for sure. But speaking very generally, this is what they found.
Very interesting.
Speaking.
Very interesting.
Right. So this is concerning. I would be concerned. And then one more data example. We use a machine learning tool called natural language processing to analyze tasting notes that consumers actually put into their devices when they're rating or talking about a wine. So let's look at champagne. So the graphic that you're looking at here is the bigger words are the words that consumers use most often relative to the other words that you can see on the screen. So here's champagne, and let me look at your competitive set. Here's Prosecco, here's Cava, and here's California sparkling wine. Let me go through that again because it's pretty quick. Here's champagne, Here's Prosecco. Here's Cava. And here's California sparkling wine.
Kathy,
So-
is the takeaway that they all look sort of the same?
The takeaway is that they all look sort of the same.
Okay.
And yes, we can get more granular. We can parse that out by varietal. We can parse it out by region. But the question from me to you is, are those little differences worth your investment? The headwinds are strong against French wines in the US, no doubt about it. To me, that's the elephant in the room. What can we learn from data about what happens when French wines do steer away from the US market, as in right about now? There's a very powerful and significant group acting within the US right now regarding the tariffs. It's called the US Wine Trade Alliance, and this is information from them that was released just this week. This is exports coming from France into the US and China. Red wine, 10 months ago, you could see the blue is significantly bigger coming from France into the US compared to November in 2019. It's flip-flopped, it's the reverse for China, as my colleague said just a few minutes ago. So let me just be clear. The US wine industry does not want this to happen. We are not fans of the Trump administration's tariffs against France, against basically all things good coming from food and wine out of Europe. US consumers do not want this to happen either. We don't. We don't want, this is not, we know that we would be worse off if there were fewer French wines in the US market. No doubt about it. I'm here, though, to take a level-headed look at things in the interest of French business. So let me take some options and suggestions moving forward. That wine that I had, this Gamay, back in Bruges, back in December, is this the future of French wines in the US? Boy, do I wish it was, because that wine knocked my socks off. Knocked my socks off. Love the wine. I wish there was more of it in my cellar right now. But it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. So what I want to sort of wrap up with is looking at occasions when three things have been done right. And just to go back to where we started, curiosity, digital fluency, and time in the market. These are the things that, should French producers want to do better in the US market, these are some of the things that need to happen. Number one, curiosity. We want to be curious. We are curious, especially wine lovers. I didn't know this wine. I had no idea what this wine was, but I knew about this wine. I was familiar with Gamay. I was familiar with the Loire. I was familiar with natural wine. Why? Because it's in popular culture. This is a story in the New Yorker magazine, had tremendous amount of traction, how natural wine became a symbol of virtuous consumption. I mean, it's a little bit of a crazy premise, and it's got a lot of controversy, but boy, did I read it, and boy, did a whole millions of other Americans read this article. The raw wine movement, for example, just putting up here a couple of the trade shows, and then a woman to my left called Pascaline Lepelletier. She is one of the reasons why I am curious about this Gamay, why Gamay from the Loire is on my radar in the first place. So that is an example of when the communications to consumers is done right. Reason number two, digital fluency. Has anybody ever heard of the Global Wine Database? Probably not. And here's why. The adoption rate of the Global Wine Database in Australia, for example, is about 98%. The adoption rate in France of the Global Wine Database is less than 10, for sure. What does the Global Wine Database do? It is a global warehouse of technical points of information about wine collected digitally that the producers yourselves put in to the system. So up to, I think it's maybe 70 points is what you could put into the system, and at no charge, by the way, at no charge to you. And here's what happens. Once it's in the Global Wine Database, it goes through an API, and it goes out into all the digital platforms that consumers are using to engage around wine. The digital trail that we follow, the root is the Global Wine Database. The reason I was led to that wine bar in Bruges at the beginning of my presentation back in December was because that wine showed up in a natural wine app called Raisin. The wine showed up and the store showed up. So let me just reiterate, Australia's adoption of that as a tool, 98%. France's, less than 10. The digital fluency is room for improvement for sure. And then the final reason 3, time in the market. I want to use Australia as an example for that. Full disclosure, Australia Decanted is a trade program that Wine Australia put on. I've attended 2 years. They invited me to MC this past year. It was hands down the best media trade event either that I've ever been to in my entire life. Hands down. They killed it. They knocked it out of the park. And here is an example of the impact of that. So look at the column on the right, the growth rate. The first couple lines are the bulk wines, the very cheap wines, and they're selling less bulk wine. They're selling less cheap wines. What they're selling more of is at the meat of that scale. 29% in the $10 to $15 range, 47% growth in the $20 to $30 range, and 33% growth in the $30 to $50 range. So some points of difference, culturally speaking, France and Australia. Respect and tradition, yes, and this is sort of a consumer's observation, my own. Certainly, Australian winemakers want you to respect their wine, want you to respect them as much as the French do. But the French, in my opinion, when I've interviewed winemakers, they lead with that. They lead with the tradition, just as they did with that example from Queenie that we looked at. But now there's more of a desire for an engagement, a level of engagement that is entertaining and that is fun. And let's just drink it. Can we just have a good time? Yes, I respect your wine. I want to respect your wine. I do. I respect your tradition. But can we have some fun? Can we have some fun? And another,
Kathy, I think you're bringing up something very interesting, is the idea of when Kathy's talked about this slide, the idea of experience, that for many people, it's really when they're opening up a bottle of wine, it's about the experience that goes beyond tradition.
For sure, for sure. And France has an amazing tradition, and it's definitely something to trade on, but not to linger over. There's a difference. And then finally, the point about a visible point of contact. For Australia, I know who that person is. I text that person texts me back. For all of Australia, I have no idea who the contact is for Champagne. I have no idea who I would reach out to for Burgundy. I have no idea who I'd reach out to for Bordeaux, much less the smaller regions. And I want to go quickly because we're coming to the end. There's a couple points that I can discuss regarding the competitive set and projects that other regions, other countries, such as, in this case, Spain, are doing with data that France is not, that we're being asked to do by countries other than France, that are taking advantage of the data opportunity that France is not. This is an example from Spain. This is an example from California. This is an example even from Canada. And just to wind up with the example of that my colleague mentioned as well, tourism and e-commerce, maybe even within France itself. Within e-commerce, value is high, but volume is low. That translates to an opportunity. But what's the point of difference? The relationship with the consumer. Americans are visiting French wine country on behalf of an American wine brand. There's just an example of 110 consumers who came with a Napa brand called Arkenstone to do a river cruise in France. We couldn't do that. There's no river in Napa that's navigable with a river cruise. You couldn't even do it at all. So here are these consumers in your country selling U.S. wine. So think about it. Think about it. And that's the elephant in the room. Thank you.
Kathy, thank you so very much. And thank you, Thorsten, as well. You know, I want to make a comment to what Kathy just said, one of her closing slides. I was on this river cruise. I think we might be thinking about the same brand. And I was surprised that we were tootling around different parts of Europe, and the wines they were serving were from the United States, specifically Texas and Colorado. And it was absolutely ridiculous. And there was a disconnect. There were, I think, so many great takeaways from Kathy and Thorsten, and now I want to bring in our other speakers, and I want to give them each a brief introduction. Sitting to the left is Adrian Chalk. Adrian I have known for 20 years in the wine trade, and he is with a company, Adrian Chalk Selections and MS Walker. Next to Adrian is a master sommelier at Racine's, Pascaline Lepelletier. And this lady took me to Burgundy as a wine buyer when I was 22 years old. And back then I had a lot of hair. This is Jean-Marie Deschamps. And I'm going to pronounce your name wrong, but this is actually our French, which I've done before. And Kathy, I need to buy you a glass of that Gamay later on. Done. And to my right, we have Manole Seeto, and you are with the U.S. Head of Wine and Spirits for Business France. So welcome. So Adrian, I would like to speak to you first, because Kathy was talking in part of her presentation about that there are other things for us to be worrying about beyond the tariffs. How has the marketplace changed for you beyond the tariff situation? We can have you use that microphone there.
C'est bon? Bonjour à tous.
Merci.
Thank you for coming. Well, I'm speaking from New York City, and we have the luxury in New York to be in a world apart from the rest of continental America. It's kind of like Paris and the hexagon of France. But what we see from both these presentations is that French wine is basically a niche product. And yet, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, it was the standard for wine. And as wine has become part of the American firmament, and wine is being produced so much more, and the world is so much flatter, wine is traveling around the world so much more, America is consuming more American wine.
Adrian, let me chime in for a second. How has this affected your business? How has it affected your business, and how do you need to pivot to continue to maintain and grow your business?
How is, look, I've become a specialist, and I've become a niche specialist. And you have to get to know your consumer by visiting with your consumer, connecting with your consumer. And like in any walk of life, communication is everything. If you don't know how to communicate, then there won't be a dialogue. It's pretty basic. And so you have to learn the language, and that's a metaphor. But really, you have to believe, and you have to communicate a story. And I loved that Kathy started off with, let me tell you a story, because immediately her personal background became the lead into her incredibly beautiful presentation.
Agreed. And I want to talk to a great sommelier who you said at Racine's, there are 2,800 selections. This is one of the finest wine lists in the United States. What do you see happening in the wine market for these consumers who are coming in, and specifically the French market?
So I'm also based in New York, so New York is not the US. No, I would like to speak about 4 points very, very briefly on my status. I'm going to start as a buyer, in the restaurant, as a seller in my restaurant, as a marketer for my restaurant, and then I would like to talk as a master sommelier. I'm going to do that very, very briefly. So I've been working in the US for 11 years now, and building wine lists out of very niche also products, meaning that I've been pushing forward organic and biodynamic wine since 11 years in very hard market, and especially even in New York, I was in a very Upper East Side, very traditionalist, and it worked. As a buyer, I have to say, buying French wine, I can do it because I'm French, because I'm traveling myself to France. Last year, I came back 12 times to France. I'm very curious about that, but I do it a lot on my own. And I have to say, compared to other countries, and I'm very glad you took Australia, but I could take also the example of Austria, France has been behind as captivating buyer and key buyer to bring them and to give them an experience that is up to their standards. I don't know if France realize how much money has been put by a lot of other countries in terms of education, in terms of masterclass, but in terms also of bringing people over to make them experience the market itself. And I'm one of the very few, I was in the Loire Valley last week, and I was one of the very, very few sommeliers. I'm not talking about importer or I'm not talking about distributor, but I was one of the very, very few sommeliers being on the ground and visiting. A lot of the trip, for example, to my colleague in Burgundy, have been taken by their own initiative going there and visiting there. So the experience as a buyer has been fantastic from other areas. I'm not even talking about Canada, that has been putting so much money to bring American buyer even to Quebec and Ontario, Vancouver, or Napa, bring so many sommeliers to experience in Napa to make them rediscover American wine. And I can talk about Colorado or Texas. They are bringing us, and we can go on trip every single week. You have no idea how much money is put by a lot of people. So that's me as a buyer. So being a French buyer is really because I want to have French wine on my list and I want to be at the forefront. As a seller of my wine, what I can tell you is unfortunately, I'm selling brand. But the idea of brand has been exploding. A brand is not just Yellowtail. Today, a brand can be a grape variety, can be a name of a producer, and sometimes can be an AOC or an appellation. I'm going to give you an example. I'm from the Loire Valley, okay? I've been promoting Chenin for some times now. And now people are considering Chenin as a brand. It became an hashtag. It became very, very popular. You can just sell wine just because it's Chenin, okay? I'm going to give you another example. Again, from the Loire Valley, because it's an area I know pretty well. A couple of years ago, nobody heard about the word Brézé, which is just a hilltop in the Saumur area. Brézé became famous from a producer called Clos Rougeard, but today people are just coming and they just want a Brézé wine. They don't even know who is making Brézé. They just want Brézé. So brand became something that became a key star producer. I'm going to give you a last example from the Loire Valley. A guy like Richard Leroy, he has 2 hectares of vine, he makes no wine. I have every single day people coming to my restaurant and they just want Richard Leroy that they saw on Instagram. They have no idea which style of wine he's making. They just want the brand Richard Leroy that the guy isn't created. So the brand became something very, very multi-facing and depending on the success of a name. So I'm selling brand. I'm going to be very quick. Instagram, I'm a marketer for my restaurant, okay? How does it work? It works with a lifestyle experience. And I have to say, I've been using that incredibly well to sell my French wine, but I'm not selling just French. I'm selling a certain way of drinking French wine, a certain way of being cool with my French wine, of something that is for everybody, that is super highly accessible, and that's something that has a huge impact. My restaurant were in the 6th year at Racine. Last year was my best year for wine. I increased my sales of wine by 25%. And I'm one of the few, and I'm a very small structure. I'm a 55-seat restaurant, and 25% on my size of restaurant is quite major. And I know I've been able to do that for Instagram. Just for French wine, and to finish on that, I want to talk about being an MS and putting that on a very positive note. The Master Sommelier education has been exploding in America. We have seen more and more people wanting to take the diploma. Just to give you an idea, number-wise, we have 3 levels of diploma going to the MS. Last year, over the last 2-3 years, we saw for the 3rd level, which is where you really see people buying wine and being like wine director and wine buyer. We are today at more than 1,000 candidates for less than 300 space for the 3rd level diploma. We are refusing people. It's incredible. When you start with the MS, when you start learning, when you go to the first introduction level, the country you learn from, the country you are taught that is the country to know, to understand wine, is France. So where we are talking right now, we are talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of students going through the MS education, starting the MS education from the intro, and in the intro, they are learning about French wine first. We spend our first day of teaching about France, and the second day we are covering the rest of the world. So we are coming now with a new generation of buyers that is not today on a buying power totally 100%. But the future is also bright in a certain way because a new generation of future actors in the wine business on retail has been educating to French wine, the complexity of the French wine, but the interest of French wine too.
Thank you. I want to make one point before I introduce Jean-Marie. How many wine producers do we have in the audience today? How many wine producers? How many wine writers do we have in the audience today? Okay. And how many importers or distributors do we have in the audience today? Okay. I'm going to suggest, and I want to tag on to something that was just said about the importance of digital media. If your wine is available in a certain market, let's say the United States, you should be on digital media and translate all your posts, whether it's on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, for the American market. My company, we run some social media for a lot of French companies, but everything is targeted to the US market and is in English with really high quality digital assets. And you can bring the region to life. Now, as I shared with you earlier, Jean-Marie brought me over to Burgundy when I was much younger, and we have her here today. Jean-Marie, what is the current state? Your main focus is in Burgundy and the Loire Valley.
Well, coming from Burgundy and good morning. Coming from Burgundy and Loire Valley, it's very interesting because I am in the middle. I think I agree with you that we carry monks, we carry history, we carry tradition, we carry limit of our appellation contrôlée, which don't give us all the time the full liberty in terms of winemaking, in terms of production, in terms of expanding. Because when you listen some of this wine, there is no limit of production, which is not our case. In very often, we are limited to one village, we are limited to one teeny vineyards. And in Burgundy, we call that a climat in addition to that. So it's, that's my first answer. It's we don't have necessarily the full power to make everything like a general brand in, around the world. The second thing is, yes, we do things. First, for information on Burgundy, call the BIVB. It's a Burgundy office. We try to answer. You can get maps, you can get information, you can get details on lieu-dit, on everything. Then, well, also don't forget, ask us. We try to give us. The other point which is important, we do events. We do wine tasting. We do, in 2 weeks, a week called Grand Jour de Bourgogne. It's every 2 years. It's 1 week, and 1 week you go on each village and you have a tasting of, I will say, 90% of the growers of the appellation, which give you your opportunity to taste all the wine of the appellation, all their style, and to show also the range of wine, which is important because as a wine buyer, wine drinker, we don't have Coca-Cola wine. We have, we have wines which are terroir plus a winemaker on the back.
Jean-Marie, I've got a question for you, because you are constantly posting on Facebook, and I love that we're friends, but here's my question for you. How many times a year do you visit the U.S. market?
Well, my promoting fine estate from Burgundy, my work is to be on the market. So it's true I am spending 4 or 5 months per year in America.
4 to 5 months. So at the end of the day, if you don't see someone, if you can't sometimes put a face, Adrian, that's what you were saying earlier on, you have to see there. It's got to be in front of your face. Oh, the sommelier, now you're stopping back to see me again, but you're traveling a lot.
Yeah, which I think we changed when I started our market. Before we were receiving importer. We were receiving some of the distributors. Then we had a step which was retailers, because for them it was important to understand what they were promoting and selling. Of course, the sommelier has been part of our life all the time. Today, in a certain way, despite, honestly, we are not organized for tourism, we receive customers who want to interest, and a lot of American. Yes, because maybe I am there, but also America, it's a curiosity, like you said. They want to learn, they want to understand, they want to discover new things. And they want to understand what makes this difference. And maybe they will have their favorite, but it's normal. We don't like all the time the same thing. So it's very important. And my job is selling, promoting, doing wine dinner, doing tasting, doing everything I can.
Well, let me ask you a question. Because you are doing all these different things,
Yes.
You're promoting, you're doing events. For a lot of people that are out here wanting to learn what has perhaps been the most successful efforts that you've done, what would that be? Would that be events? Would it be some of social media? Would it be getting sommeliers and retailers over to visit your properties? Or is it all of them?
I think it's part of all of them. My maybe mistake, and I will answer to you. I am not Australia, I am Burgundy and Loire. And due to that, I am still limited on media and database. But I am trying every layer, everything I can. And also sharing what the growers are doing to pass a relationship. It's not only on the back of the bottle and the back of the label. You have someone and a team and a region.
Jean-Marie, thank you. I'd now like to introduce Manele Saito, and you're actually really doing a lot covering the business of French wine and helping bring more French wine into the United States, and you are based in San Francisco.
That's correct. I'm based in San Francisco, and in my field of work, we're trying to bring as many new producers to the US and also Canada. But most importantly, what we're looking at is evaluating and helping the producers to be ready for those markets. And indeed, marketing, communication are tools, essential tools to succeed today in those markets. And what we're looking also at is the importers, distributors, and consumers' need and behavior so that we match as best in the time.
I have a question for you. It's interesting you said that certain producers are not ready to enter certain markets, and I completely agree with that statement. Can you go into a little bit more detail for the audience?
Sure. What I mean, they're not ready is like, it's really basics, but we look at their websites. Is it in English? Do you have technical sheets translated in English? Is it user-friendly? Just this it seems very basic, but when we reach out to our contacts, importers on the field, and they hear your name, the first thing they do is to go to the net, as well as the consumer. When I like this bottle of wine, wow, I take a picture, I look on Vivino or Delectable or whatever app I have to check it out. So that's what the buyers in the US and Canada do.
And I think Kathy from Enolytics said it really well, the idea of a digital presence.
I agree. The digital presence is more and more important, important investment to do.
Kathy, with a lot of the trends you were talking about in your presentation, do you do research for specific wineries as well as regions?
I do. So we have worked with definitely individual producers, but we are working more and more actually with associations, with trade associations, because frankly, there's power in numbers. There's power in numbers. We are able, because of the nature of data, to slice and dice according to what individual members need for themselves, but being able to pull together data and resources from different sources, but be able to speak on behalf of the whole association and benchmark against from one to another is actually really powerful.
Thank you. I want to bring it back to you in terms of, we were talking about some of the assets that are needed before they enter the market. What type of support does your organization give to the wineries?
So basically, before they enter the market, we offer the service to test their product. We help them select with them, having eyes on the field, and we basically approach those importers, and whenever they evaluate the offer and they say it's good, or the price is too expensive, or whatever, the packaging is not corresponding, or I do like it. So after this search, we actually go back and discuss and see if we go to the next step, to the market.
How did these producers get in touch with you and your team in San Francisco?
So first of all, we have the head office in Paris and also team members scattered throughout the regions and the Chambre de Commerce. And in the end, they know where to reach me.
Okay. Well, first off, I want to thank all of our speakers and panelists for their smarts and professionalism. And I want to start taking some questions from the audience. But I want all the panelists to think of one thing you want to say that either is optimistic or pessimistic about the future of French wine in the United States. Think about it. Think about it. I'd like to take some questions from the audience, and there are no crazy questions. We can translate the question if we need to. Right over here.
Hi, thank you, all of you, for your presentations. Kathy, you had touched briefly on China and how that trade, the data that you had on how a lot of the French wine, or the imports that are changing, the import numbers are changing because of the tariffs in the U.S. going towards China. I guess my question for you and any of the panelists is, if the U.S. loses that market share to China after, and if the tariffs go away and we get past all of this, will the U.S. be able to get that French market back, or will France be able to get the U.S. market back?
Yes, for sure. So in terms of the U.S. presence in the Chinese wine market, it's already quite limited. The U.S. consumes the vast majority of what we produce, so there's actually not a tremendous need for us to push into another market. I have, however, written several articles for Forbes about the Chinese wine market and how the current tariff situation is impacting that immediately. And one of the commentators, one of the people, the producers that I interviewed, said that this is Asia, it's China, and you need to take very much of a long view. In China, philosophically and in terms of commerce, they don't speak about a bad quarter or even a bad year. they speak about a good decade. So those who have made inroads into China are committed to staying. Otherwise, if they left even for a year, they would have lost all of that traction because of everyone, who's just ready to come in, including the Chileans, including the Australians, including the Argentinians even. That'd be a lost effort.
Thorsten, what do you think about the question? How would you respond?
I think there's really two things we need to talk about there. So if we talk first about, God forbid, the tariffs come in and France by nature will then lose some market share in the US, that will be hard to get back depending on how long this takes. Because, of course, other suppliers, be they Americans, be they Chilean, be they Australian, be they German, be they Austrian, they're not sleeping. It depends whether the tariffs will be on French wines or on European wines. So we don't know at the moment what will actually happen with that. But if there's something sustained, of course the other ones are not sleeping. They will put structures in place that will be sort of semi-permanent. They will, they will really double up on their marketing to American consumers and make their brand and the country brand stronger and stronger. So it will be harder to come back in. I think China is a different thing. So if we're now saying French winemakers are exporting more to the Chinese market, different question, I would say. And that will stand them in good stead. The Chinese market will be a good market. You have a market of 1.3, 1.4 billion people. Just a fraction of an improvement on per capita consumption of French wine will be a lot of increment.
Thank you. I know the tariffs, I don't want this to be the whole discussion, and indeed, it has not. And I want to thank the panelists and everyone here for that. Do we have another question? And then I wanted to get to Adrian with a question.
So if you're not talking about the tariffs, have you seen an evolution in the trade from these very complicated French wines until today? Has there been something better as a buyer, as an importer, from like the last 30 years, for example?
I'll tell you what, well, sorry. One of the most extraordinary impediments to wine and French wine consumption in America is that most Americans don't even own corkscrews. So
that is true. That's not only a joke, that is true.
Another truth is that most wine is consumed within 1 year of harvest and within 1 hour of purchase, whether you're in Cape Town, Paris, London, or New York. The point is, if your wine is not on the shelf, it's not going to sell. If it's not at eye level, it will sell less. And the point is, most wine is purchased based on what it looks like on the outside, not what it tastes like on the inside. These are very hard truths, but that's what makes the difference in terms of sales, because we can start the dialogue by traveling to the places we like to go. And that's what I'm going to recommend to anyone who wants to sell to America. If you like America, if you like New York, if you like San Francisco, go there, because that's where that positive energy is going to translate into sales. If you don't like going to Dallas, then don't go to Dallas. Even if there are so many other places, there's so much competition. Make your life easy. Anyway, my point is that you, in terms of specific French sales, the market is changing all the time. And I think the more, and we've all said this in the panel, the more we get people from America to France and French people to America, the brighter the future.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Any other questions? We have a question in the back.
Thank you. I would like to come back to tariffs, because I think it is very important, and it's important for every person at this show. It's important for pretty much everybody. Higher? pretty much everybody. Sorry. Important for pretty much everyone. So what impact are the tariffs, the 25% tariffs having now? And if on Friday it becomes 100% tariff, what kind of impact, immediate impact, will that have?
Thank you. Jean-Marie, I would love for you to answer this.
Yes. Well, about the statistic, I don't think at this point, we can say all the ones which will not be going to America will go to China. There are other markets. We sell in 34 different countries. So every country is important for us, and of course, more or less, because of the number also of humans. Norwegia is good, Finland is good, but you don't have as much as American and Chinese people. Also, it's not USA reverse China. About the immediate influence of tariff, I was in America when it's happened. It's clear. The importer had container on the boat. They were hostage of the system because they had to pay immediately, economically, to pay the tariff. So for them, it was to be in the trap, economic trap, financial trap. The other thing, don't forget, you have many states where the prices have to be postponed. And if you postpone the price early October, and you receive your wine after the 18th of October with 25% more, you had to change your price in November or accept to lose 25% scratch. And to postpone your sales in November and to be allowed to sell in December. It's also why so many importers, some of them did not change before the first of the year because they had maybe old stock and they wanted to keep the customer happy, and it was a raise of price on the 1st of January. Yes, and they did not want it to sell at the end of the year. What I could see on my side is the one which were blocked before by the 100% tariff threatening. We move a lot of wine in January, which means an importer took the chance to deliver, and especially in New York, including for importer from Texas, from California, from Oregon, to be quickly in United States before the threatness of 100%.
Thank you. Pascaline, is there anything how the price increases might affect the way you're buying wine at the restaurant?
Of course, we are at the end of the chain. So we also happen in a moment of the year that was very complicated for everybody in terms of cash flow and buying power. Like we're all talking about that. In New York, it's a very specific way of buying. We have to buy the wine. We have to pay it at 30 days. Otherwise, you have like COD, so you have to pay on delivery. So you have just to manage your cash flow. And suddenly we are talking about, we bought even more wine in January, which is usually a month when we don't buy wine because we're entering January, February, and March, which are the slower quarter of the year for a lot of buyers. So everybody is like rethinking how we can anticipate a potential. On our side, as buyer, I have to say the importer distributor have been doing an extraordinary part because they've been swallowing most of the increase to make us able to buy at the regular price to be able to sell and to save the last quarter of the year. So I have to say there is a whole integrity of the profession from A to Z to make sure that at the end the final consumer will barely feel the 25%. But if we are talking about 100%, in effect, what's going to happen? We are just going to buy all the available stock in America. We are going to try to find other ways to buy. Maybe we are going to have to buy, why not? We are going to have to find people to ship us buy in Asia and buy through indirect market, even French wine for another way, that would maybe be cheaper than getting the 100%. And there will be tax. So we have no idea. How can we say that? At one point, the consumer, I'm in a niche market. If you pay already very high price point, you're probably going to be able to pay a tiny bit more of that price point, but at the entry level, it's just impossible. So we are going to have to move to other markets and try to pray for the next 6 months to be very, very quick.
I think a lot of the remarks today inspired me to be more thoughtful how I can help wineries sell. Because tariffs, 25% tariff, 1% tariff, 100% tariff, many regions in France have historically had a challenge of getting their wine to have footing in the American marketplace. It's true. It's changing for certain regions that are part often of an association where marketing dollars are being used strongly and strategically. But let's not discount some of the remarks that were said today that go beyond tariffs, but ultimately, how can we improve the future of French wine in the United States? Before we end the seminar, I wanted to go down the path and if you've got a closing remark or one adage, and let people know how we can find you. Adrian, let's start with you.
I don't want to paint a dark picture, but I'm naturally optimistic and naturally resolute. And I love good wine, but I love France. So, you know, I'm naturally drawn to this country. And I think ultimately it's about sharing that love. And so if you haven't been to France, I would say to a sommelier, then I envy your discovery, because it's one of the most beautiful places on the planet. And once you get to know the history and geography and culture of France, then your pleasure is even more extreme. And if you can heighten your pleasure, then you've reached beauty.
Adrian, thank you very much. You can applaud. It's okay.
So on my side, it's going to be a smart education. We know each other for a long time. Better targeted promotion and smart education, especially on the French side. Me being on the side, I'm seeing which type of wine is sent during, especially trades by the trade association, and it's a problem. When I'm going to take again the example of Austria Decanted, who went to the US, where the absolute top producer, promoting everybody in a very, very open-minded way. So we had Inchki coming, which is this very iconic and painful, sending their top wine, as well as up-and-coming, super cool natural producer, and with a little bit more mainstream wine. And everybody was working together. And us, as we have no time as buyer, and we're suddenly exposed to the very, very best working together with very, very up and trending producers. So everybody has something for that in the top education possible, with very, very high-end presentation, very targeted, So I would say the future for me leads into a way better use of funding, of trade association, and which product you are presenting to buyer. Don't present just the entry-level mainstream. You have to play the hardcore and show the top of the best, because you have one shot to present that to the buyer. And education of the buyer is what you are looking to get.
Thank you. Jean-Marie.
I think for me it's the third crisis. The first one was Chirac put the veto against America. Also, everybody threw our French wine in the street. The second one was the American crisis, no, the financial crisis in the world in 2008, 2009, and everybody was afraid about the price of the French wine, how we could sell, how we can buy. And now, of course, there is a slight difference, which is tariff. If it's 25%, agree with Adrian. We will succeed to make balance. We will succeed to do something. If it's 100%, it's just impossible because we still have a cost of production. The grower cannot go below and cannot lose their quality to just because of taxes. So on the meantime, I really believe in America. You are great. You are like a ball. You just bong, and we will do it. We will continue. We will go as much more, and I am sure everybody will find little ways, and maybe the President Trump will not do it because 100% tax kills the tax.
Jean-Marie, thank you. Kathy.
Okay, I have a favor to ask every single person in this room. Ready? So the one single thing that I think you can do if you are a producer trying to be active in the U.S. market is to get yourselves input into the Global Wine Database. Here is the email address of my friend David Glusman. I would like every single one of you to email him and tell him that I sent you because he would love nothing more to have France in his system. Believe me, he would love this. His name is David, D-A-V-I-D, at Folly, FOLLYINC.com. David at follyinc.com. You can email me. My email's up there. But if you missed that for some reason, please let me know. If you think about the future of U.S. wines in the U.S., digital fluency is critical. And that is, and getting on the Global Wine Database for you too, is high priority.
Kathy, thank you very much. Thorsten.
Well, as a German living in the UK, I know something about being beaten down by negative discussion on Brexit for 300 years, was it? I don't know how long it was. My advice would be do not descend into victimhood. Do not rage against things you cannot change. The tariffs may or may not come. If you're a small wine producer, there is nothing you can do about it. You can't really rage about what your association may or may not do. You can't rage against, you can try and lobby things. You can say, look at what Wine Australia are doing, and why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you coming together as one big wine association? But in the meantime, what you need to do is find your niche, and there are niches. You have here on the panel, you have people who run their own importing agencies. You've got people who run their own restaurants. They can be your niche. It can be your two bottles that is being sold in the wine shop in Bruges. That can be
You should
your niche.
import this wine, Kathy.
Make it famous. Make it famous. No, but I think that's the point. Make it work your way. There will always be people who support you. There will be consumers who support you. But find out who your consumer actually is. Home in on that consumer. Digital engagement is an absolute must as far as the US market is concerned. I would agree there definitely with Kathy. So make it work for you, whatever comes your way, is my way of thinking here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Manale.
Well, Thurston, I think I totally agree with you. We shouldn't keep a stance as victims and definitely keep at work. Take a step back and look at our strengths and weaknesses and see how we can improve. And like what Pascaline was saying, I think for me it would be the best to approach the American market and the Canadian market with France under one roof, under one message as a whole. Of course, we are different and we have a lot of, and this is what makes you unique, but we need to work a message on French wine as a whole.
Well, I think the message of French wine, I think, is all about quality. I think we all agree about that. We were talking about some of the words like legacy and tradition, which might not work for the American consumer as much as fun and easy to appreciate and part of the experience. But first off, I want to thank you all for coming here and listening this morning. So thank you. Thank you very much. And I also want to end by saying my father famously told me many years ago that asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. Up here on this stage, we have panelists who can be such a resource of information, the associations, your colleagues across the pathway in Burgundy. It can be a host of different people. But if you don't ask for help, you don't give someone the opportunity to say yes. Thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists.